Contributions to the game of football from Western Pennsylvania don't always have to be from great players or coaches or owners. How about some of the scouts and the people that recognize talent? Well, today we're going to talk about one of those, Bill Nunn from Pittsburgh, and his great journey through the NFL scouting department and what he did to open some doors, coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with PigskinDispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal to positive football history. And we are in our segment that we try to do the beginning of every weekend, where we're going to talk about some Western Pennsylvania contributions to the game of football. And what a better way to talk about than one of Western Pennsylvania's own born and raised that had a major contribution to the game of football. And that would be Bill Nunn. Now, many people can sit back and say, who the heck is Bill Nunn? Well, Bill Nunn was inducted in the Pro Football Hall of Fame posthumously in the summer of 2021. Bill was not an NFL player, and when I walked around Canton, Ohio in that summer of 2021, the year that he was inducted, many people didn't even know who he was or what his responsibilities or how he got into the Hall of Fame. What they didn't realize is that Bill was about as interesting of a football person as they come. He was savvy, knowledgeable, and clever as a fox. And he took NFL scouting to places it had never been before, in more ways than one, and helped assemble one of the most legendary teams of all time in the National Football League. Now, Bill was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he is born as William Goldwyn Nunn III. His father was William Goldwyn Nunn II, and her junior. And his father was a journalist at the Pittsburgh Courier. Now, Nunn was a pretty good athlete in his younger days. This is the younger Bill III, and he was a star basketball player at West Virginia State, and he was so good that even the Harlem Globetrotters wanted to ink him to a contract. Now, amazingly, Bill took a hard pass on that offer from the Globetrotters and followed his father's footsteps to work as a writer and an editor with the Pittsburgh Courier, a weekly newspaper that was a leader in covering stories of African American news, especially sports and the young athletes that played them of African American descent. Now, much of what we know about early HBCU teams and the Negro Leagues of baseball and a lot of black basketball that was not really covered by the normal white papers was covered in the Courier from 1907 through 1966. And in the 1960s, Nunn traveled each week to the best games featuring black colleges. And he continued the Courier's tradition of compiling an annual HBCU All-America team from 1950 all the way to 1974, and even hosted an end-of-the-season banquet in Pittsburgh each January for the top HBCU players. This gave him great connections and loyalties from coaches and administrators of those mostly small southern schools that were brimming with untapped talent. Now, it's interesting to know that Bill Nunn nominated Mike Tomlin's father, the current head man of the Steelers, Ed Tomlin, to the 1967 HBCU All-American team. As a matter of fact, Coach Tomlin has regaled in interviews that Nunn approached him on his very first day as the Steelers head man to broach the story with the proud son, and they had a few chuckles over that. Now, by the time the late 1960s had rolled around, Steelers founder Art Rooney did a lot of coercing and arm twisting and, probably a little bit of massaging and, banging fists and begging and pleading to have Bill Nunn join the Steelers staff in their struggling scouting department. Remember, the Steelers weren't very good prior to 1970. And the team was horrid, and it just needed help with talent, all the help they could get. And what Rooney really ended up getting was a dedicated man that had a direct pipeline into the pool of many great players. And that really sets up some very interesting stories that we have found through some archives of some great interviews with some very good players and other sources. And some of these come to mind. I can remember reading where Joe Green, better known as Mean Joe Green, played at North Texas State. And when he was a senior, he was very coveted, very high profile. Everybody knew he was probably going to be the top pick in the upcoming NFL draft in, I believe, 1969. And him and his wife went out for dinner. They were still living on college campus in an apartment. And they went out for dinner or something, and they left for the evening. And they came home, and they noticed that something was going on in their apartment. So, Joe was a big man. He busted open the door to see what's going on, and he found Bill Nunn and one of Bill's friends, who was a scout for the Detroit Lions, sitting in Joe's house. They made himself a couple drinks of Joe Green's some liquor he had there, and they were having a good time. And Bill Nunn immediately jumped to his feet, saw Green, gigantic and angry, and said, "Hey, I'm Bill Nunn with the Pittsburgh Steelers." And when Joe Green calmed down a little bit, he heard Pittsburgh Steelers, and the other gentleman introduced himself with the Lions and calmed down. But Joe Green regales that was the first of the Pittsburgh Steelers organization that he had ever met, and that's the way he met Bill Nunn. And they, of course, had some great laughs about that throughout their careers together. So that's the kind of guy that Bill Nunn was. Now, there's another story, 1974. This is a very famous story, the 74 draft, the very famous 74 draft. Well, one of the players drafted was John Stallworth out of Alabama A&M, a very small, HBCU college. And so Bill Nunn, who had that direct pipeline to get into there and talk to the coaches, he went in there and was watching film of Stallworth and saw how good and explosive Stallworth was, but nobody else knew about him. So Nunn told the coaching staff, he said, "Hey, these are all the tapes you have of Stallworth?" And they say, "Yeah, this is everything you got right here." He goes, "You know what? I'm going to take these and go make copies of them and send them to the other NFL teams so they don't, they have them so they can get a look at John." And the coaches are, "Oh yeah, please do. We want to make sure you get it to." So none of the other NFL franchises had a copy of this tape. As a matter of fact, some of them said they're still waiting to get that tape on Stallworth. And of course, the Steelers drafted him in the middle of the 1974 NFL draft with great pickups they had there, including some other Hall of Fame players. And definitely John Stallworth went on to have a Hall of Fame career himself. So, very savvy, very clever, trying to do things to get his way. Another great story of draft day of Bill Nunn is Louis Lips, 1983 NFL draft. Now, the Steelers had their eye on Louis, and they were sort of middle of the pack in the draft. I forget exactly where they were, probably 15, 16, 17, something like that. And they wanted Louis Lips. And back then, the tradition was, this is before cell phones, people only had landlines. The tradition was that you would call the player probably like an hour before you drafted them, the team would, so that they would have you on the line to make sure you were home and make sure you accepted their draft pick. So I guess Bill Nunn got on the phone earlier than this with Louis Lips and just chatted on the phone for him for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And by the time the Steelers pick came around, the other teams couldn't call Louis Lips because his phone was busy because Bill Nunn had him tied up. And then the Steelers pick came up and Bill Nunn said, "Hey, welcome to the Steelers. We're drafting you right now." And that's how Louis Lips was drafted by the Steelers, a sort of a call block by Bill Nunn, tying up that line of Louis Lips's home phone line. So just some excellent stories of the great Bill Nunn and his contributions, that not only what he did to the Steelers, drafting drafting players is one thing. To go out and find some of these hidden talents as restricted free agents. Donnie Shell, who was also inducted in the Football Hall of Fame in 2021. Just undrafted, but he was also part of that 1974 roster of rookies that came in. Lynn Swan and I believe John Kolb was in there, right? Or maybe it was Mike Webster and Lambert and Stallworth and Donnie Shell picking up later. Just some excellent grabs that the Bill Nunn and his staff, the rest of the scouting staff did, but a lot of it had to do with the cleverness and the eye for talent and getting himself directly in the pipeline of where the action is. And that was Bill Nunn. And now, drafting players out of the HBCU is, a lot more common. A lot more people are looking at talent there. They're getting a lot more exposure. Some of those players that would formerly had to play only in the HBCU, the African-American players, are now able to play at major colleges. Back in the 60s, remember, this wasn't always the case. Some colleges regrettably spurned having players of darker color complexion not be able to play for their teams, and it's a misfortune. But it was people like Bill Nunn that opened doors and did a lot of things to help get these black players in the NFL and get recognized for the great talents that they are. Some of them are in the Hall of Fame because of Bill Nunn. And you could think of two of them there, John Stallworth and Donnie Shell, that probably directly because of the great mind and great talent and probably pounding his fists on the table in the Steeler boardroom of getting them drafted or on the team or picked up as an unrestricted free agent. Just sure talent. So fortunately, we lost Bill Nunn in 2016 at the age of 62, and he will be sadly missed. He still is sadly missed these years later, but what a great job he did, and I'm so glad that he was put into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. You can visit his bus there, Canton, Ohio, and we're glad that you were able to join us again, and we were glad we were able to talk about another great Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania contribution to the great game of football. And definitely Bill Nunn was, because he just took scouting to a whole new level in the NFL and finding talent. Hope you enjoyed this, and join us tomorrow for some more great football history. Until tomorrow, have a great gridiron day.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, PigskinDispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. PigskinDispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandham at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.